Well, hey, good morning, everyone, and thanks again for joining us. We're coming at you on another day of our Gold Medal Squared virtual clinic. A couple of things to call to your attention before we get started here with two of my all-time favorite people, Keegan and Heather. We're on day 6 of our virtual clinic, and in addition to these live sessions, we've released content from Gold Medal Squared Plus. Day 6 in your tab there is offensive systems. So we talk about offensive systems as well as set tempo and some other things. And you've got access to all those resources there on day 6. Tomorrow's day 7, and we'll be doing individual defensive skills and we'll be releasing content that we put together with Heather and Mary Lake from there at BYU. Also a reminder, tomorrow morning, a live Zoom session with Courtney Thompson. That was for athletes, specific to athletes on mindset and mental strength. The 10 a.m. session is full. And so we've opened another session at 2 o'clock p.m. There's still room for that session for your athletes at 2 o'clock p.m. With Courtney tomorrow. We're going to be emailing you content relative to questions that we've received from this Zoom session. So if you've attended any of these Zoom sessions, look out for an email from us with some content that Mike's been getting requests for. Also, just a reminder that there's a replay of all of our video sessions, all the live Zoom video sessions that we've been doing. That's going to be available at goldmedalsquared.com/virtual-clinic. Probably where you've gone to access this video, but on that page, there are replays of all the live Zoom sessions that we've done. And then finally, just a reminder that we started out this session as kind of a question and answer on defensive systems, but we've expanded it to kind of include whatever other questions you might have for Heather and Keegan, given their broad area of expertise. So Mike, anything else we need to talk about before we get going with these guys?
Yeah, let's jump in. We've got a lot of questions, and we have not been successful in getting through all of them within the hour. So,
okay, yeah. One more reminder: we're going to have you ask questions through the Q&A feature in your Zoom window. There's a Q&A box, so just answer or ask questions there. And then if you see a question that is, hey, that's my question. I've got that same question. Just upvote it, and we tend to address the questions that are getting upvotes or have the most kind of commonality between everybody asking questions. So just that reminder as well.
Right on. Let's get going. Heather and Keegan, there's always questions about eye work, how to teach vision. And I think there's two parts of it. There's back row vision and there's vision with our blockers. And last week we touched briefly on some of the small differences between eye work for a blocker and eye work for a back row defender. And so there's a few questions here that are asking about that. And so Heather, let's start with you. What are your differences in how you'd want to train a back row defender in their eye work versus a blocker in their eye work?
Yeah, it's important that our back row defenders are working on eye work just like our front row block is. So they're going to have the same eye sequence as far as ball setter, ball hitter, and they're going to see the pass. And if it's coming over and it's deep enough in the court, they're going to go, pass that ball up to the setter. So they've got to see the same thing as our blockers got to see. When our defensive system is working at its best, both our front row and our back row are seeing the same things, especially our front row. But our back row defenders are still going to work on their eye work just the same. And for sure, they're going to get a good look at the setter. They're going to ask, is the setter dumping? Is it coming over? Is it tight? We want them to be able to defend tight passes, so they've got to be ready. And then we want them to get a good look at the set and the hitter, their approach, and all those cues that the hitter is going to give them. And so I'd say it's pretty similar, but I think it gets lost in practices or matches talking about the eye work for defenders. And so we've got a coach specifically assigned to be watching the defender's eyes. And it's a pretty big deal that we don't forget about those little people in the back row and what they're seeing and how they react. 'Cause they've got to ultimately decide what skill to use based off what they're seeing. And that's kind of hard to do, especially in the moment. They've got to figure out which defensive skill am I going to use and do it the best they can.
Yeah, and Keegan, I guess we can't assume that everyone knows what we're talking about with ball center, ball hitter. Can you tell everyone what that means in your gym and the different, the time that you'd watch each phase of that I sequence?
Yeah. So talking about the ball setter, ball hitter sequence, the first ball, of course, refers to the pass. Is it over? Is it something that we're asking our athletes? Is it over? Making sure that they're ready for an overpass or a play near the net. So we want them quickly finding is the setter. What is this setter telling us in the way that she's moving? And most setters at all levels are telling you a lot. And that we're saying, which refers to the set, or where is this set, and what's it look like? Is it inside? Is it out? Is it low? Is it high? Then lastly, is the hitter telling us as they approach to attack this ball. To answer your question a little more specific, Mike, the biggest difference for us when we're talking about eye work for blockers versus defenders is we like our defenders to see the hitter a little bit sooner than we want our blockers to see the hitter. I think when it comes to our block, we like to set it up based on the set align, because we know hitters like to hit where the set takes them. And so once they're kind of there, they're there, but we have our defenders getting the work onto the hitters a little bit earlier than blockers. That would be our only difference in teaching eye work for those two positions.
Yeah, right on. We say, for those of listening, we could say ball setter, 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 ball hitter for our blockers. All we're doing there is putting a little emphasis on getting your eyes to the setter as quickly as you can and watching that setter for as long as you can. And then maybe for our back row defenders, we could say ball setter, ball hitter, hitter, hitter. And all we're doing there is just putting a little bit of an emphasis on on the sequence in different spots, depending on where you are on the court. So Heather, in terms of, I was listening to Mary talk about being able to see the game. There's a lot of questions here as it relates to just training eye work in general. And, we talk about blocked versus random. And obviously the obvious answer is to get good at seeing the right thing, you have to play a lot of volleyball. Do you guys have anything specific that you're doing in training other than just lots of game-like reps and feedback that could help a new athlete get better at eye work?
Yeah, I think the best thing we can do is ask lots of questions. So ask, what do you see here? What are you seeing here? And have them talk through with you what they saw. The other thing that we like to do, we did a bunch before we finished practicing this spring, was, hey, here's a tip, here's a pancake this ball, and let them see and give them ideas of this is what a pancake or a tip's going to look like if a hitter's going to tip and go pancake this ball. And it sounds really elementary and really basic, but I think it's good for these hitters to get used to seeing, hey, this is a roll shot, hey, this is a line, this is a cross court, and get them those visuals. And then obviously we're going to go into random and help their eyes train them a little bit more. That's really all we can do. I love playing more volleyball. That's always going to be the best answer. Play as much volleyball as you can. And you'll start to pick up on the nuances of the game. Is the ball off the net? Is it going to go deep corner? Am I taking that step to that corner? And then just, again, asking them, what'd you see there? A lot of times they're going to say, I don't know. And that's not okay in our gym. So I don't know gets you kicked out pretty quickly. Or gets my blood boiling pretty fast. And so they've got to know it's their body. They've got to be aware of what their body's doing, the results it's causing. And that's when we know we're getting into mindful, deliberate practicing, is when they really understand what they're doing and why. And that takes a lot of communication between your players and coaches.
When was the last time you kicked someone out for that?
It's been a while. This spring was pretty good. Our kids were pretty open. They were open. We have kids in our gym that aren't comfortable chucking. So I'd get more, I'm more open to kicking a kid off the court if they don't chuck a ball they're supposed to chuck. I think that's really uncomfortable for some kids. And we had a kid that just saw great growth this year in chucking balls, and she had never done it in club. And it was pretty cool to see. And so I'll give him a chance to take a breather and bring him back on the court.
All right. Keegan, when your blockers are seeing the set, how long do they watch the set, and how long do they watch the hitter, and what are the important pieces of that phase of your eye work?
So maybe there's kind of two answers to that for me. One is the higher the set, the more we look at it, and generally the more we're looking at it. If you can imagine an opposing middle blocker running a really fast attack, that set's not going to be in the air for a very long time. So telling our middle to look at that set for a long time doesn't make a lot of sense, because it's only in the air for a second. the faster the set, the more we are seeing the hitter is what I would say. That's kind of a goal. But then maybe the other answer I would say is, as long as you need to see it, let's make it the shortest time. And so for some of our better athletes who've got better, they're not looking at the set quite long because they only need to look at it for a split second. But for some of our younger athletes who may have experience, they need to look at it as long as it takes to get it right, and that's one thing that we talk about, is just go when you know, and so that's one how to answer that question.
Cool. Thank you. Quick question from Patrick. What does a chuck mean? And Patrick, what we're just saying, an overhead dig, and it doesn't have to be this pretty set. We can have big, strong hands, and it's a dig. And so that's what Heather's calling a overhead dig. And she calls it a chuck because it's not this pretty set. It's a dig, and you can get it out of your hands in a way that doesn't have to necessarily look pretty. So lots of questions about what is a chuck. Did I do that okay, Heather?
Great.
Okay. Let's see. Let's transition a little bit to some middle questions. It's always a popular topic. Do you teach multiple defensive systems based on your opponent, or do you only teach middle and keep your middle back in middle while creating adjustments around them? Heather, you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, we're not going to adjust very quickly. It's going to take a lot for us to move out of our base defense, our middle, or our 2x2. And so there will be times when we may make adjustments, but it's going to come in a match when we need to make adjustments based off of what's actually happening. If somebody else has changed up their offensive game plan, if we think we know what's happening and they've maybe attacked us a little bit differently, we might think about stepping to the right here or deep here. But we're really not going to make many adjustments until somebody really forces our hand into doing that. We just like to stick with our system. Our kids are comfortable with it, and they do a good job.
Keegan, are there any in the pack? Are there any athletes that have forced you guys to make some defensive adjustments?
Yeah, a couple transcendent players. When we feel like we run into an athlete who is kind of just doing something special. There's only maybe a couple in the conference, Catherine Plummer being one, and even Adriana Fitzmaurice. I thought both of those athletes had kind of a patterned, transcendent shot that was just something that we don't see, but they can repeatedly execute. In the case of Adriana Fitzmaurice, she was a tremendous angle attacker, and so we found ourselves standing closer than 2x2. We were up closer near the 10-foot line against her because she's able to ball into angles that are not common. But that's 4 years worth of data, of seeing that and knowing that it's going to happen. And then same thing with Catherine Plummer. For a while there, she was able to ball with heat to the deep corner, kind of the 5-6 seam, and it was just blowing by our middle defenders over their heads. They weren't able to chuck it. And so maybe that was another scenario where we made an adjustment to be a little, one step towards the corner, one step deeper to try and have a chance to overhead defend some of those plays. But it's pretty, again, you've got to have something really special, that we don't think we can defend in our normal defensive package.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about our team with the men's national team, and our kind of, as we're creating reports, our saying is there needs to be a pretty good reason for us to leave the middle of the court. What we see is a lot of difference between in-system tendencies and out-of-system tendencies. So for us, we would probably adjust more based on in-system versus out-of-system, probably more so than an individual tendency. And so out-of-system, we get a ton of sets that are high hands going out, off the court, stuff like that. So those are just a few examples of how you may adjust. More along the lines of a high school team or a junior high school team or a young club team, you're going to see more tips, you're going to see more junk. And so certainly moving your 2x2 defenders up is an option. But generally speaking, we want to be cautious about moving your best defender out of the middle of the court, just because regardless of level, gender, there's going to be an awful lot of balls that go to that area. So you really can't go wrong as a as a base or a generic defense to be in. So hopefully that answers your question. Chris, did I hit that okay?
Yeah, I think the other thing of note is if you're coaching at a developmental level, a lot of times the tendency is to want to move players into positions where things might happen a lot. But now what we've done is we've eliminated their need to learn and develop to see that, and then be able to go make that move themselves. So we take that agency out of their hands and we put them in a spot. And yeah, that might be a good spot and it might be the right spot. But what we've done is we've removed the read, and we're not asking them to develop as a volleyball player. We're asking them to follow the rules that the coach establishes. And so I'm always really, really happy to just play in my base defensive system. And even if I know something happens a lot, that's an opportunity for me to get the kids some reps and to teach them to see it and go get it, as opposed to just, hey, I'm going to move you out of this and go stand there. And at almost all levels of development, until, maybe they get to the university level, or even then sometimes, just I really like this idea of going to teach them to see as opposed to give them a lot of rules to follow.
So at what point, Heather, is it okay for your middle player to leave her box? When does that happen? Because certainly it happens.
Yeah. The box is more of a beginning phase for our defenders when they get into our system and our gym, and understanding the being stopped, being balanced, ready to read and react. So we take it off, put it up every so often. It's more of a reminder for us when we're watching our practice film. How are we doing here? How are we doing being stopped? And so for sure they're going to go dig the ball, and so they're going to read, and what they see is what they know. So they're going to go dig the ball, and they're going to turn and run, and they're going to sprawl, and they're going to leave that box a bunch, and they're going to dig balls 1, 2, 3 feet around that box. It's a pretty important deal for us. And so we want them to be stopped so they could get a good read with the set and the hitter, and then they're going to react to what they see.
Yeah, and one of the hardest things for, I think, any coach who is learning the middle concepts to wrap their head around is this idea that we don't have to fill holes. And it's understandable why that would be a challenge to wrap your head around. And the athletes organically want to go fill these holes that they see. And we're actually, Joe Trinzi's has some insane number of data points where we're trying to put together an official study right now surrounding this topic in terms of what happens behind the block. But this is actually a question. Does the middle box move depending on the block, the position, a split block, the height of your blockers? Keegan, what have you learned based on the data in the Pac-12, and how are you guys managing defenders that are standing right behind a well-formed block?
Yeah, there's only, what comes to mind in my head is Chris's father yelling at me to do a study, which I've done a bunch of about this. And the one situation that we find ourselves moving from middle in an in-system situation is against what we would call a gap attack, or a middle attack that is being run between our right front and our middle front blocker. And in all of the hitting charts that we've seen, a lot of those balls get hit into the 1-6 seam, kind of straight ahead where the attacker is approaching. They're not actually getting that ball back towards the middle. And so, in very rare circumstances, are we taking one step to our right from middle against a gap attack. We call it fronting the gap. It's just something that we've seen. Just most gap hitters are hitting that ball straight through that seam. And so that's maybe the one adjustment that we make in terms of when we see a seam. But when it comes to the pin attackers, when there are seams in the block, which there are often, just such a large percentage of balls are getting deflected back towards middle that it's not worth it to us to be moving that late when a seam develops.
And certainly if an athlete who has great vision moves into a seam, every now and again, they're going to dig a ball, right? And that's going to happen. What we need to remind everyone is that all of the data that we've taken is taken with a well-formed block or some form of a block in front of them. And so all the data points, these heat maps where you see middle, there's a block in front of those defenders already. And so that's still where the balls end up. And so it is a little bit of it's something hard to wrap your head around. You got to watch for it in practice and just kind of build your trust within with your coaching staff and your athletes that this is actually what's happening. But, the amount of times that I've seen a big Russian middle blocker going one-on-one against a big American middle blocker, and that ball goes right over his head into the middle of the court, right in the shadow of the block. It happens all the time. And then the other part of this that we can't forget is if you look at a heat map from a middle blocker, most of them are going to be hitting to the 2x2 areas, right? They're going to be hitting crossbody or wrist away. And at least at our level, what percentage of those balls are actually diggable? And the answer is very, very few. We're not going to dig Mazursky from, Russia when he's bombing balls, against a one-on-one block. And certainly there's middles in the women's game that can bring some heat too. And so you got to ask yourself, what balls can we realistically dig and turn in transition? And those balls that get touched off the top of the block, soft blocked, whatever, those are the balls we have to be great on, at least at our level, and take advantage of opportunities to dig balls that are maybe a little bit easier to manage than someone taking a clean rip. And so, coaches, ask yourself that question. If we're stepping into a big hole and that attacker rips the ball, what are the odds we're going to dig that ball? And what are the odds we're going to dig it to a place where we can turn it and kill it? And so that's another argument I would say that lends itself to staying in the system and knowing that lots of balls are going to go there regardless of where the block ends up. And some of those balls, lots of those balls may even be easier to dig and turn in transition than if we're chasing holes all over the court. So let's see here. I got riled up on that answer and I got behind here. When you're coaching in a match, how many times does the same attack to the same location happen before you make a defensive adjustment for that team or for that player? Keegan, you want to grab that one?
Hopefully not too many times if we're doing our jobs.
Yeah.
I think it's a common temptation that we run into on our sideline, mostly with our block. A lot of times we have a plan, largely whether we're going to take some more seam from an attacker or some more line. And I have a bias here, and Heather, don't listen, but I don't like getting beat down the line. Mike, I hate it. I hate when people hit outside of our block down the line. It just drives me nuts. And so I'm probably a little more inclined to overreact to balls getting hit down the line than some of my assistants. And so they would say one before Keegan starts freaking out. But I'd like to think it's at least, 2 or 3 before we make a change. But that's mostly happening along the net. We're not making a ton of changes defensively behind the block. I think one thing that coaches continually underestimate is how long it takes to get your athletes to be able to do something new, like stand in a different position. We'll spend 2 weeks if we want to make a change with where we're going to stand, for an elite attacker like Catherine Plummer in my last example. We'll spend 2 weeks on it and we'll still get it wrong because making a change like that takes so much time. And so, yeah, trying to make these little in-game adjustments with your defenders, I think you're expecting a lot. It's just not something I think you can do. The habits are not there. So
I'll say, Mike, in one example for me in a match where I felt like I needed to make an adjustment and was probably overreacting was a Sweet 16 game in 2018. We were playing Florida, and it felt like to me they were just going high hands off the block, and our middle was too shallow. And I remember just yelling at Dave, we got to back up. We got to get deeper. And we just stayed the course and we stuck in there. And he was so sweet. He came in and he watched the match and he said, "Hey, I just want to let you know, like this really only happened 3 times. But when you're in the moment, it felt like it was every swing Florida was taking was high off hands where we needed to adjust. And, surely we didn't. And I needed to calm down. And we ended up winning that match. And it was a good lesson for me."
Right on. Okay, moving on here. How can I train my team to see and defend things that we are unable to do against them in practice ourselves? So I can tell you a quick story here. This is Greg asking this question. Last quad, we played Iran a ton, and they do some drift routes in the middle. And them and maybe Argentina, those two countries did it better than everyone else. And we won World League in 2014 with a rule that all you can run in transition is a 1. We were keeping it super simple, no drift routes. And so in practice, we never saw the Iranian drift routes, or we never saw Argentina doing this stuff, sliding out to the pin and all this different stuff. And so we eventually had to start doing it in practice so that we could be a little bit better at it ourselves, both offensively and defensively. But do you guys have any, Heather, do you have any ideas on how you can prepare for a big time attacker? Maybe the University of Utah, they've got that lefty outside, and you probably don't have a lefty outside in your gym. And how do you get reps preparing for a hitter like that?
Yeah, I think, it's unique in that you want to train your system and you want to get really good at what you want to get good at. And then you've got to prepare for your opponents that bring some different dynamics, whether it's a fast offense, a slow offense. So, and for us, that's a big deal. So for sure, we're bringing in, we get to have at our level the opportunity to have what we call male practice players. And so we've got guys in the gym that are able to do things that maybe some of our girls can't. Or if I don't have a lefty, I do have a male practice player who's a lefty that will be, one of those players for the week as we're heading into one of those matches. And so I would say to maybe some of the younger levels, look for opportunities to bring in some different players, whether it's guys or girls that can be some sort of practice player that you can use for specific reasons, such as scouting, if that's going to help you maybe do something that your own team can't do. In our league, we've got a lot of middle sets that tend to be a little bit higher and slower than even our offense. And so that poses issues for us heading into those matches where we've got to do something about that and get our blockers comfortable with a higher set to the middle and a quicker ball to the outside. So we're continually looking for ideas on how to do that and get our kids prepared while still training within our own system and not screwing up our own athletes and asking them to do a bunch of stuff they're not comfortable with. So I think there's some challenges there that can be overcome just by being creative.
Yeah,
and
right on.
By the way, we do have 2 lefties on our team. We have 3 lefties now. It's the most lefties we've ever had.
On the left?
Well, no, but they hit there in row 1, and everyone, you got to train. Pin hitters are pin hitters to us, so they're playing left and right and getting swings on the left and right.
Sweet. Okay, Keegan, do you find footwork drills, whether it's probably, I think Christina, I think you're probably referring to blocking footwork, but do you find it beneficial without a ball? Not just on the court, but maybe in pre-practice activities. How are you guys working on footwork up at Washington?
I really like our pre-practice always includes some series of block and transition movements, and at times some serve, receive, attack movements. In the places where the game isn't quite so random. We know what we want our serve, receive, attack patterns to look like. We know what we want our 3-step swing block moves to look like. So that's always part of just our habits and our routines. And it's also a good check. There's been a number of times where we'll be 3 or 4 weeks in the season and I'll go, this transition footwork is totally wrong here. And how did nobody see this? And it's usually when we haven't done a good job of watching our athletes during pre-practice and making sure that they're being diligent with these movements that are easy to repeat. But beyond that, it's tough. I have a really hard time when there is no involved. I think when an athlete has a really big change to make, or just introducing a first movement, I think there is a place for it. But as soon as they're successful with the movement, at 85%, getting a ball in there, and start talking about the visual component of the skill. But for me personally, I have a very hard time doing things without a ball. I last about 5 minutes and then I'm getting impatient. So my assistants will tell you that.
Yeah, as someone who played for Carl, we did warm-ups, every day we did pre-practice activities with blocking, footwork patterns, whatever. But he was great at continuing to coach those things once we got into practice with the ball. And so like we talked about during block versus random, you got to define the demands of the skill. You got to get the kids to be, like Keegan said, 85%, whatever, effective at it. And then we got to go coach the heck out of them in game-like activities and give them opportunities to really learn how to do it when it matters. Krista Van Sant has a question. Keegan, do you know her?
Yeah, she did my job for me, but yeah.
What determines the footwork that you teach your lefts to defend the slide? Do you prefer the 3-step swing block or more of a quick 3? I think this is a great question. I see teams doing both. Nice question, Krista. What do you think, Keegan?
Maybe 2 factors that make us decide that decision. The first, I think, is the strength of our athlete. And so using Krista as an example, 6'3", touching 10'5", by her senior year, and was able to pull with the slide at a high speed and then still get way across the net from that move. And so, yeah, in that situation, we thought, why put her in this block movement when she can be really good shuffle blocking? Same thing with Kajima, similar sized athlete. With some of our smaller athletes where we think they need every inch they can get, we tend to have them be in more block movement since they can't be quite as dynamic shuffle blocking. But maybe the other factor for me is, does the opposing middle attack at multiple points behind the setter? And when they can, it's very difficult to be in this 3-step swing block movement, because you could be loaded to go to a wide slide, and then all of a sudden that slide hitter stops short inside and you're in no position to jump and defend them. So in situations where an opposing middle can hit at multiple points behind the setter, we're usually in some form of a 2-step plus a 3-step shuffle movement to try and be able to defend both attacks.
Right on. I don't know who wants to answer this one. Well, I'll read the question and then someone jump in here. But what is your final resting place for the quiet eye in defending? And I think what he's asking is anticipating the zone of impact, hand and ball. Should the eye attempt to remain on the impact zone as the ball travels too fast to track, or is the ball traveling too fast? I butchered that. Chris, you saw that question, right? You got anything there?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we find is that athletes, one of the things we want to talk to them about is we don't want to try and track an attacker's hand. The hand is actually going to be moving too fast. And one of the analogies that I like to use is the tail of the whip is going to follow the handle of the whip. And so their hand and their subsequent arm is going to follow kind of where their shoulders and their torso and that sort of thing start leading them. And so I kind of like the defender to kind of get a big picture of head and shoulders and that kind of part of the body. And I find that it's really rare that a defender, if I ask them, what are you looking at? They don't tell me, I'm looking at this precise point on the body. What they see is they kind of got a feel for all of these things happening in unison. And they kind of get a look at kind of these big parts of the body moving. And it doesn't really end up being this super tight focus on a single body part. It's more of a sense of all of these things happening together in this neighborhood are going to produce this kind of ball direction or this kind of shot. And so one of the things that I feel like as we start getting this quiet eye kind of going is you kind of want to get a feel for the movements that are happening here as opposed to dialing in on one specific piece of the body. And that seems to produce better results.
Keegan or Heather, any additional thoughts?
I think that's pretty good.
Cool.
I never heard that analogy, and I think it's great. I think there's not a lot you can do when the hitter's making a last-minute adjustment with their hand. I don't see how you can see visually, and so I like Chris's analogy of the tip of the whip following the tail. It's cool.
Heather, what do you guys do for covering in terms of, a hitter is going up, they get set, they're going up, they're going to attack a ball, and the defenders come around them and cover in the event that she gets blocked. What's your guys' strategy with that?
Yeah, you have Mary Lake on your team.
Just go do it all.
I mean, she was really good at that. She was our leader. She led the backcourt for us. And so we're going to have certain outer cups that we like that we're going to work on. And I think that's something actually, Mike, that gets overlooked a bunch is coverage duties. And, you got, kids who are approaching for the big and then got to cover and got to see the setter, and hitters that are approaching, in front or behind that don't get set, that got to come play a part and be involved. And I always like to say, expect the unexpected. And that's how I was trained. Just, you got to expect. I love my hitters a bunch, but I'm going to expect them to get blocked. That way I'm playing defense off the block. So we like to train our defenders to literally play defense off the block, which means they've got to be stopped and able to react to the ball hitting the block, and I can go make a coverage on it. And so I do think it gets lost, and it's important to train it and to talk about responsibilities. And, setters love to watch their own set and be impressed, and they don't get in there a bunch and cover. And I think they can touch a bunch of balls, setters specifically. And obviously we don't want them touching a bunch of balls because we want them setting, but it's going to happen. And I think we lose a couple points by just not being in good spots. If you're just stopped, ready to react, it's going to save you some points.
What do you do with your middle blockers?
Yeah, they're going to turn and cover. And so wherever they are, as much as they can get involved, they're going to turn, and a lot of balls go to them as well. And I think Kennedy, Redding, Eschenberg on our team is one of the best middle, just turn and run and helping her teammate, or not turn and run, but turn and face and help her teammates out as best she can. And I love watching when kids just get really into being there for their teammates. And I'm going to let you go take a big rip because I'm going to be here if somehow they block it. So just trying to cover as much as you can with, hey, you're not getting set. Let's be a part of this coverage here. And we're going to give up the back part of the court. Sorry to interrupt you. We're going to, hey, if someone blocks us and it goes deep, good for them. It doesn't happen a ton, but this is where most balls get covered, and you can make your own charts where those balls are going in your league. And let's put our defenders there, and it's a pretty good deal.
So where is your deepest defender on tip coverage?
Gosh, middle of the court. I mean, somewhere in that middle area. They're not super deep. They're just in between. You've got the inner cup, you got the second outer cup, and find a spot where you can see the hitter in the block and make some good moves.
Awesome. The next question, it's a great question. Keegan, do you teach your blockers to take away a specific shot, or do you try to teach the blocker to take what they're seeing? And it's always this balancing act between staying in the system, trusting the system, but also not taking away a blocker or a defender's ability to see the game, read the game. And we also know that hitters hit where the set takes them. And so what do you tell your blockers? We have our system, we have taking the tendency, but we also have vision. And how do you balance those two?
With I think a strong emphasis leading towards wanting them to read. Chris alluded to it earlier. When I'm both the coach and the athlete, and we tell them, hey, disregard what you see and just listen to what I say, I think we're setting them up for failure at some point down the road. And for us, in the last few years, we've been in this real concept of a December mindset. We don't care about anything that happens as long as it's leading towards playing our best in December. And that refers to our eye work. And we had a couple of Elite Eight performances early in my head coaching career where we played some teams, and all I could think is we haven't taught them how to see the game. We just haven't taught them how to see and get into those, really high pressure matches. Habits are going to define you. I don't know what Heather would say about, she's been a lot of, Elite Eights and Final Fours, but what I tell them in those moments is going to have as much an impact on the game as what we have created in them in terms of hits. And so we're getting a little bit away from just blocking in general, but I want them to block what they see most often. And you're rarely going to, I'm rarely going to be upset when my athlete makes a choice based on something they saw, because it represents them being really active in this process. So that's how I think.
Okay. Chris, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think one of the things we're going to do is we're going to, put our athletes in spots where they're going to deal best with tendencies and with probabilities. So if we have an attacker that really loves to hit the line, we'll probably, kind of make sure that our blockers are starting out in good position to defend that. And then from that spot, they get to go block what they see. And we're going to put them in positions that allow them to handle the probabilities, but ultimately the choice for where they end up gets to be theirs. And I like what Keegan said, just we got to train with that kind of idea in mind as time goes on, because ultimately when you get down the road pretty far, it's really hard to take away a shot. We look at those heat maps like you talked about, and we see all of these shots clustered in the middle, even at the highest level of the game. And coaches see that, coaches know that. Why don't we take that away? Why isn't the block taking that away, that shot away? And it's what we find is it's really, really hard to take a shot away with your block. And so we find that it's a much better practice to kind of put us in high probability spots, and then from there, allow the athlete to go read.
Okay, thanks. All right, someone is asking about the split step, which is, Austin, you're going to get different answers probably depending on who you ask, but I can tell you what I've seen, and then I'd like to hear what everyone else has to say. I know Chris and Carl, they were teaching the split step pretty actively when Chris was the head coach at BYU.
And we screwed that up, Mike.
Yeah, and on the national team, we've tinkered with it, but what I've seen is when we actively teach it, which we've gone all in and we've actively taught it, is it actually creates some hang time. And so if I have to think about this as a blocker, I have to think about split stepping as a ball's coming to the setter, and then I have to react. That's a pretty gnarly task to have to manage. And so with Chris's blockers, when I was watching them, I thought, man, they seem a little bit late, and they seem like they're getting a little bit too high. It was excessive, and it was more than a natural fast split step that was happening. And so what we started saying with our guys is, most of them are doing it anyways. If you go watch Max Holt block, if you go watch David Lee block, these guys are all taking a little fast split step hop when they block, and they're not having to think about it. And when you have to think about something, it slows you down. And they're also not getting too high in the air, and so they're not getting hang time. It's not slowing them down. And so we understand the science behind it is legit, right? Tennis players, shortstop, all these guys are taking this split step. But we would just caution you to, if you teach it actively, caution against, or keep an eye on your athletes actually jumping too high, getting hang time, and making it more of not a natural move. It's slower, and it's actually hurting us. And so again, you're going to get different answers, but that's what I've seen go on. And Chris, I'll let you speak to your experience as well.
Yeah, so just a little bit of background. A split step is simply just a little hop that an athlete will make when their mind knows that they have to move somewhere fast, but they don't know the direction that they have to move. So physiologists call it engaging stretch reflex, and it's actually a physiological process that undergoes. So you actually put your muscles under tension. You put your muscles under stress, under stretch reflex, by doing a little hop off the ground. And as Mike referred to, you'll see that from almost any sport where somebody has to move fast in an unknown direction. And so we see that from back row defenders. We'll see it, as Mike talked about, from blockers from time to time. But the way it most commonly manifests itself is just the kind of heels come up off the ground, or maybe even the player leaves the ground slightly altogether. And so that's this little hop or split step, as they call it. And Mike, like you talked about, I think my dad really championed this idea of getting a split step in place, and we found exactly what you found. And I think there was a Canadian study that actually saw this. That was what happened was when we are overtly teaching a split step, the step happens too late and too big. Whereas if we just simply say dig the ball or block the ball, the body will incorporate that little hop or that little step. It'll integrate stretch reflex into the move organically without us ever teaching it, coaching it, referring to it. It just happens because that's the way humans like to move. And so what we found was we were making a mistake. It was poor coaching on our part to teach that overtly, because it was exactly like you said. the players would jump too high and too soon or too late, and it was slowing up their responses as opposed to speeding it up. And so the kind of end result was we abandoned referring to it altogether. We just said dig the ball, or we just said block the ball, and then their bodies took over. And quite often, just without ever having been coached to do it, we'd see them make these little hops or split steps that would be on time and would be the right size, and was just a much better play if we acknowledged that it happened and didn't try to coach them out of it. Don't hop or don't do this. It was just acknowledge that it happened, but don't overtly coach it.
Okay. I think we got that one pretty good. All right. Can you address how you balance, Keegan, can you address how you balance setters getting defensive reps versus offensive reps when it comes to, either your tutoring or 6-on-6 training?
Man, hope my setter's not watching right now. She would have thoughts on this. I try and get them, it depends. Obvious things are how many setters you have in your gym. In our situation, we had 2 in our gym, and one of them was pretty bad most of the year. And so we didn't have a lot of options, at least in 6-on-6, on what when our setter were to get defensive reps. We would kind of do some small group games where one side is out of system the entire time, so that, our setter gets some chances to play defense there. But I always think about what skill is the athlete performing most often that will contribute to us winning, and whatever it is, I want them doing a lot of that in practice. And so, for our setter, she needs to be setting quite a bit in order for us to be successful. And so I err on the side of making sure that she's setting a bunch, and then we get her defensive reps wherever we can in as many formats as we can. But yeah, when it comes to our setters, serving and setting, and then defense would be my priorities.
All right, Chris is going to take the next one here.
So the question was from Anthony. He says, for blocking, do you teach independent arm movement when blocking on the pin? For example, holding line with one and taking angle with the other. And Anthony, we don't. The thing that we like best is both arms operating together as a single piece. And the distance between those arms, I like to tell our athletes that a ball cannot pass between your 2 arms. And so, your hands, or however far apart your hands get to be to do that. But the ball doesn't get to pass between your hands or your arms. And I want them operating as a single piece. The thing that we found is that as soon as you try to take line with one arm and angle with the other, almost always you've created a block that is going to be much easier to tool. And you're going to create seams and holes in that space. And just the quality of block touches goes way down when we start spreading our arms apart or splitting those arms up. And so just we'll stuff more balls, and the quality of touches seem to go way up when we use our arms as a single piece together, as opposed to using independent arms to kind of take a line and take an angle. And occasionally you'll watch YouTube highlights of big league play where somebody does that. This arm does that and the other arm does something else, and they'll get a stuff and it's spectacular and it looks really cool. And you think, oh, that's a great thing. But that's for sure the exception, not the rule. And we talk about wanting to play good volleyball over long periods of time as opposed to great volleyball in spurts. And so what you see in those highlights is maybe spectacular volleyball in a spurt, but we'd much rather just play percentages over time, and using 2 arms together is the percentage play.
Keegan and Heather, you guys doing anything different than that? Or you guys, is that about what you're teaching in your gyms?
Yeah.
Okay. Heather, with young kids, junior high, 9th graders, 10th graders, what's is it important to teach them swing blocking? Or do you have any tips for doing that? Some of these kids can't get their hands over the net. So how do we balance, playing in a system, being able to make the footwork patterns and, not caring so much probably about getting a stuff block at that age group?
Yeah, I think it's super important to teach. We at our camps, and we teach swim blocking to all ages, and I think it's important for them to get the fundamentals in place and their footwork, their eye work, and their handwork. So if they can't get over the net, then what better way to get over the net eventually is to turn and run and use your arms to be dynamic, and being able to learn those fundamentals early is only going to help them. And so I think even at our level, we've got players that aren't so tall and can't get over the net super great. So we're teaching them how to swing block as best and as efficiently as they can. And if they really can't get over the net, that it's not a bad idea to maybe peel somebody off and not have them block. But that's, going to be dependent on what you're trying to do. And I've seen it even at the college level where a setter's peeled off the net and let the middle go try to stuff the ball, and they've decided to pick up some tips. So it happens even, I think you even talked about it, Mike, happening at international level with one of the teams you've played. And so I think it's important they learn the fundamentals of swing blocking, and when they can do it, it's going to be huge for them to have those in place.
Yeah, and mechanically, I think it's important to say that if I was coaching an 8th grader, the mechanics of a swing blocking move would be exactly the same as if I'm coaching an Olympian. That particular skill, I don't know that there's a whole lot of differences. And so I'd go about those two things, those two age levels exactly the same way. So Keegan, any thoughts there?
I mean, it's a common debate. I think when you're coaching juniors, which I did for a number of years, why do we teach the 12-year-olds 3 contacts when clearly bumping it over on 1 is going to win most often? It's just as a coach, you get to decide what problems you're going to hand off to the next coach, want to set this athlete up for success. And I certainly have been that coach who's, want that we're losing matches because I'm not just setting every ball to the outside. I'm trying to, run a balanced offense or trying to do things that I know will serve these athletes better down the road. You have to make that decision. Do you want to win now, or do you want to set this athlete up for success? And you might be the only person who knows that, that you took a few losses to put these kids on a good track, and you can hopefully be proud of that. So, common problem.
Yeah. And Keegan, when you guys have, we're going to pivot here a little bit. When you guys have, let's say a freshman coming in and you only have 2-3 weeks of preseason, and it's just this crash course trying to get these kids ready to play. You start teaching them maybe a sprawl move or a pancake. Let's say they don't have that skill set yet. Is that right out of the gate? I know digging is so important in the women's game. How do you go, what's your process for implementing or teaching the skills, the individual skills defensively? And then how do you transition into a more game-like setting? And I think that's maybe with individual defense, that is where a lot of people struggle, including myself. You got to define the demands of the skill. You got to get them reps. And then we go play a bunch of volleyball and the reps decrease because you're only digging a couple balls, every now and again in a drill. How do you guys balance that at UW in terms of teaching and then getting them the right kind of reps?
Wow, good question. I've certainly screwed that up more times than I've gotten it right, but we certainly have a lot of athletes who come in with some very deficient skill sets, mostly, like you said, defense and setting at a system and serving. Those are the 3 skills that we find ourselves just, man, these kids are behind. And we usually tackle serving first, because in order to run effective practices, we need to have 15 athletes who can serve at a high level. And the more that my 3rd freshman middle blocker is missing her serve, the less we're practicing, and so we usually are jumping all over that. The defensive skills, it's more of a curiosity, lighthearted teaching, if I'm being honest. If I'm dealing with an athlete who, again, is just joined our program and they don't know how to overhead dig, for example, we're teaching in a very, positive way, where we're not, demanding a lot from that athlete because they've got nothing in place. And we do most of our individual defensive skill work in the winter, Mike, to be honest. But the mistake that I've made too often, I think, with a fall sport is trying to athletes, have them address all these weaknesses early in their career. and they walk into their first couple of matches and they have no confidence, and I've tried to make them a jack of all trades and a master of none. And I found myself screwing that up more often. I think the right thing by making them, hey, you don't know how to do this, this, and this. So we're going to spend all your time doing this, this, and this. And then they forget that they're this big goon who can stuff balls and kill 4 balls a set. And I want them to have an identity that we can build on. So I think moving forward, I'm trying to play to our athletes' strengths more, and then in the off season address their kind of deficiencies.
Mike, if I can add, oh, go ahead.
No, go for it.
Joe, just in regards to the preseason for us, that some high schools might also find themselves in is we've looked at opportunities to have some early morning or early session practices where we're not jumping, and the impact on playing defense, obviously going to the floor is going to impact your body, but maybe some of our other players that aren't going to jump a ton, or our male practice players, can take some swings so we can get game-like reps early in the morning. Is a good opportunity for us to get some extra reps and develop some practice plans that include a lot of individual defense work that we need to get done. Even maybe some small group games where some other players are jumping, and then you do a lot of your sixes and jumping in the afternoon is what we found works. And then being able to sprinkle in defensive sessions, we call them defensive bursts, or what we call them, and we might stop practice for 5-10 minutes and do a defensive burst, and that looks a lot of different ways, but our kids like it. It kind of brings energy up, especially if you're kind of stale and you need a little bit more. Kids love for someone just to whale balls at them, or a player, and they get excited about defense. They love defensive drills, so we found ways to get that done.
And while we're talking about this, the answer is probably both, but if you can get a libero that has great defensive technique and has the aggressive defensive attitude that we want, you're going to have a special defender. Do you find that the defenders that you're dealing with have one or the other, and you have to kind of emphasize one or the other?
I agree. I think finding a libero, we're all looking for a libero that possesses a really good feel for the ball defensively and serve receive, and has a great platform and can add a system set with their hands, or with their platform, preferably with their hands, and is a really good server. So all those things we're looking for, and when the stars align and you get one like we've had for the past 4 years, it's really nice. But it's a lot of work, and I think that's what a great libero does, is can pass and dig.
Heather, while we have you, how big is your middle box, the tape you put down?
Yeah, it's just a big enough box for them to have their feet in a nice wide stance and turn and face the attackers. So I don't know if it was 3 by 2. I think I measured it one time, 3 feet by 2. Not super big, but you can really do whatever you feel your team needs.
Yeah. Keegan, one more for you, a couple more here. If you guys need to bounce, let us know. The question is, I know you can't do tactically, but you can't do technically, but how important is speed of offense at the college level, and probably as it relates to juniors as well? And probably you're going to get different answers here, but I'm curious what you think in terms of how aggressive do we want to be with pushing speed offensively?
Oh boy. Yeah. Trying to start a debate here. The first thing that came to mind is just this saying I used to hear from Jim McLaughlin. He said, "Speed kills, but it can kill you." That's what he used to say, and I remember that. I think that the faster tempo that you attempt to run puts a big stress on your setter. And so, to use an example personal to us, we didn't run a very fast slide attack last season. We ran it, we would call it a second step slide. We thought that it gave our setter a big window to set, and that if she made little mistakes, that our hitters could make up for it. As she's developed and started to get more confident setting overhead, we've made the decision to kind of speed up that slide, because she has developed as an athlete and can locate that ball at a much higher rate in a faster tempo. And so I'm really big the last couple of years on designing our systems around the abilities of our players. If I've made the mistake of trying to fit new players into a quote unquote established Washington system, and it hasn't fit them, particularly when it comes to offense. I've tried to run middles at tempos that aren't appropriate to them, and it's cost me a year of their development. And so I would just encourage coaches to really know their athletes and design their systems around their athletes. That's my politically correct answer to that one, Mike.
Well, I think based on what I've seen with our guys on the national team, it's crazy the different sets that our guys need based on their mechanics. And, you got Matt Anderson, who's, 6'9", 6'10", whatever, jumps pretty high, and he's got this kind of a longer arm swing. So it takes him a little bit longer to get on the ball. You got Taylor Sander, who, Chris, I know you guys tried to run him fast. We've tried to run him faster, but his effectiveness is higher when he just has a little more air under the ball, because he's skying and he's way the heck up there. And for whatever reason, his mechanics and his approach, mechanics and all that, he's more successful with a little bit higher of a set. And
I think you're going to find that almost universally, Mike, that hitters are all a little better when they've just got some kind of, that the set just has a little air under it, where it's just a little slower. That's, I think that's for sure a better way to go.
Yeah. And then you've got a guy like Garrett on our team who doesn't have a huge arm, but he's cagey, and we're firing balls out to him, and he's power tipping. And so, yeah, I mean, what I'd recommend, and ultimately what it falls back on, is effectiveness. And if you talk to Luka Slabe, who's the assistant coach for our women's national team, they were in a tournament a couple summers ago, and they're trying to run the fastest offense in the world. And in that tournament, their setters lost a little bit of confidence, and they weren't able to deliver that ball like they wanted to. And according to Luka, he'll tell you that it had a pretty big impact on their ability to win that tournament. So you have these different spectrums, right? You have those that are trying to run it as fast as we possibly can. And even at the highest of levels, that's hard to do. And so it's a risk reward deal. And so there's got to be some way to measure this. And like, I think we're all saying, it's pretty hitter dependent.
Well, Mike, for me, it's also, that's maybe even more so a function of your setter. Can your setter set that ball at that pace? And that to me was always the main throttle. Even if we had hitters that could hit it, it was, can the setter put it in the right place every single time? And the faster you want to go, the more precise and demanding those sets need to be. And it's really hard as a setter to be consistent and to put that ball in the same place every single time. And the windows get pretty small when you start to set that fast. And it's a really, really tough job for your setter to get that done.
The other part of this is if you are running a tempo set, we got to make sure we're running that set at the appropriate time. And so we got to talk to our hitters and setters about, okay, this is out of system. We're going to be more effective. We put a little air under the ball, or yeah, that dig is perfect. We can fire that out with some tempo. And so sometimes we fall in love with speed and it hurts us. And so we've got to be able to A, execute the play, but B, also run it at the right times. And so the communication channel between hitter and setter and calling the right play given the situation is a big part of that equation. Let's see. Heather, what's your libero's mentality, or what's your coaching philosophy on taking first contacts from front row players that are easy, tips, roll shots, stuff like that?
Tips, yeah, we want our back row defenders taking any easy balls, especially our libero. We want her taking charge and taking free balls and down balls that she can. If she's in left back, it's going to be a little bit difficult. If she's in middle back, it's a great spot for her to go take a bunch of balls. But we want our front row to take balls that are there. So if it's a free ball coming over and they're taking 2 steps off and they can attack it, we want our front row to attack those balls. But if it's going over their head or behind them, we want our back row players to let our hitters go take a nice approach, let our setter get out of the way and set up our offense.
You'd rather, and so we're trying to avoid our blockers reaching back and having confusion between the libero.
Yeah, if they can hit it, we want them to hit it. If they can grab it with their hands, they can go ahead and grab it with their hands. I think we got to get okay at that. But I mean, we've got our back row defenders being loud and calling off players and over communicating, and our libero's the first one that's going to be doing all that.
All right. One more question for you guys, and then we'll wrap it up. Keegan, how long does it take for a team to adjust to the middle philosophy when they have been in a perimeter or rotation their entire life? We need an exact number of days. How long does it take?
I don't know how well can you coach?
Yeah.
How coachable are your athletes? I think the issue is not how long it takes, but how well you can coach it. Honestly, not joking around. I think it's so easy to get distracted from what you're working on, especially when you're a one-person coach or a two-person coaching staff in a practice. You might be looking at eye work, or you might be looking at defensive positioning, and you can't help yourself but coach something else that happens. And so one thing that I've had to get better at is ignoring a lot of things that are happening that I don't approve of in order to stay focused on the task at hand. And I think that's the mistake that I make most often. I see other coaches making most often is we'll have a drill, it'll have a focus, but within the third or fourth rep, we're talking about something totally different, and we're standing somewhere different, and we're looking somewhere different. Just ignore everything else and just stay on task. And it's a lot harder than it sounds, is what I would say to that, Mike.
Turns out coaches have a limited ability to process information too, right? So I make that mistake all the time. Chris, any final thoughts on that question there before we wrap this up?
No, again, just like everything else, it's a process, and it's going to come along at the speed at which you prioritize it. And the more you coach it, the faster it comes along. But again, you've got to juggle all these other demands of coaching what matters most. But for me, my dad would always talk about the fact that offensive systems, he felt like you could put in place pretty quickly, but that a good defensive system, one where the players could read and react, that they used the appropriate mechanics and everything kind of went along with that took a while to get in place. And so we would work on our defensive systems, especially early on in our development. If we had the guys would always get to train in the fall and then compete in the winter. And so we'd spend a lot of time in the fall trying to get our defensive system in place, with the understanding that it was going to take a while to come along. And so I guess maybe the only recommendation I would have is just go into it with that awareness and have some patience.
Yeah. And while we're talking about this, let's make this the last question. And it's, should high school teams be using middle? And Chris, why don't you just keep running with this one?
I'd actually like to hear Heather and Keegan's perspective on this, because I know they watch a lot of high school and junior level volleyball. Heather, what do you see at high school levels?
I see a lot of balls going to middle. I see a lot of balls going one step of where that defender would be standing and able to read and react. And so I would say, I think if you're not sure, I think you can do what Carl McGowan says and make your own charts and see where balls are going at your club tournaments or your high school tournaments, and put your defenders where most balls go and where your kids can actually dig the ball. So I would say, every level that I'm watching, I'm seeing a bunch of balls go there, and that's where our kids can touch a lot of balls. Keegan?
Okay. Keegan, any final thoughts for us here?
I just continue to challenge your own biases here, coaches. We have a tendency to remember things that are traumatizing or that happen once out of 100 times and overreact to it. Lots of coaches I talk to who say, I've got 30 years of experience and I've won this many championships. I know. And I certainly had those thoughts, in my early coaching career, and, really do remove yourself from the equation and do a study and do a chart and challenge your own beliefs. Do that throughout your career if you want to continue to grow. So.
Thank you. Chris, you want to wrap us up here?
Yeah, well, just I said it before. I appreciate the fact that Heather and Keegan would come on and join us. They're not only two of my favorite people, just in terms of people, but they're both really, really highly accomplished and very good volleyball coaches. I think you saw that from their answers today. So thanks for joining us. Just a reminder, you've got day 6 offensive systems being released on the day 6 tab in your virtual clinic. Tomorrow is individual defense skills. So a lot of the things that we've been talking about, getting on the floor, digging balls overhead, that sort of thing, gets addressed tomorrow with Heather and Mary. And we'll see more of Courtney tomorrow for sessions at 10 a.m. that's full, but a 2 p.m. session still has some space, talking specifically to athletes about mental strength and confidence, that sort of thing. And just again, everybody, thanks so much for being a part of this, for joining us, and we'll hope you're doing great. If your family's anything like mine, being on top of each other is getting to be a little bit of a challenge, but hopefully you're hanging in there and everybody's doing all right.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay, see you, everyone.
See ya. Thanks.